In conjunction with the review that you're about to watch, I've developed a new rule regarding Fruit Bat Factory published games. Basically, if the game is a visual novel that has only 6 letters in the title, be prepared for an emotional roller coaster that will pull at your heartstrings. A game that I'll end up recommending in the end, but will cause me horrible grief in how to actually talk about it without spoiling it. First, it was Enigma. Then it was Seabed. Once is an incident. 2 is a coincidence. And 3, being Mamiya, is a pattern. Mamiya is a visual novel developed by Kenkoland and is published by Fruit Bat Factory and costs $19.99. It's available on Steam today, April 30th, 2021. It's a story about the harsh reality of life, dealing with the dread of the real world and a fallout from tragedy, along with a touch of supernatural elements and the end of the actual world. You know, the usual happy affair on this channel. But before I begin this review, this key was obtained from the publisher for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? Oh boy, where to begin on this one? Let's start with the main premise. The story is obviously the main focus of Mamiya, as it has no traditional gameplay elements, and the game is divided into 2 major parts, Fall Down and Downfall. Fall Down focuses on the death and funeral of Natsume, an unknown character at the time, and the fallout from his death on 4 specific characters in the world. The game follows each of the stories specifically down a path, having a strong range of topics that they cover for each character, which I'll expand on in a bit. Meanwhile, Downfall is the aftermath and rehabilitation of that story, which I admit is very difficult to talk about without giving away major plot points that I think are best left for the player to discover for themselves. There's new characters and focus in this section, but still follows the world built up in Fall Down, and all the stories come in about a 10 to 15 hour package, depending on how fast you read. It feels like a lot longer than that, however, mostly because you'll want to go back and reread sections to maybe pick up on hints that you missed with some of the game's reveals. I mean, this. Yeah, some of it was me leaving the game on overnight, but some of it, no. It was me rereading things over and over again, even before I had finished the story. Before I go any further in this review, however, let me issue a bit of a warning. The material in Mamiya is not something that those with a weak tolerance for dark themes should play. Now look, I'm the kind of person who believes a person should challenge themselves with new genres and games and try to look at things at a different perspective, and I think that includes games that tackle difficult issues. However, Mamiya's themes and the way it approaches its content, especially in the Fall Down section of the game and last parts of the Downfall section, is not inductive to newcomers of harsher themes in visual novels. Hell, I'm not even talking about dark themes seen in games that I've recommended before, like the Danganronpa series or something like Zanki Zero. Even in those games that have reasonable writing, yes, I think Danganronpa has reasonable writing and I will die on this hill, those themes, there's a level of disconnect in the writing that makes you observe the events of the game, which still allows you to connect the characters and their stories, but almost from a distance of sorts. That's not the case with Mamiya. One of the most potent things about this writing is how well it places you in the shoes of the characters you're following, and how it digs its hooks into you and makes you feel the despair, hope, and other various feelings that these characters go through, especially in the first section and last sections of the game. The game does this with the inner monologues of its writing, focusing not entirely describing the physical situations and extreme detail of those situations, but letting the emotional reactions dictate how you attempt to dissect the situations that are unfolding. The game masterfully uses sound and music stings to set your emotions up, emphasizing a shocking event and tearing at your heartstrings as you just try to understand how these characters can keep going at times, but doesn't overdo it. That's the key thing. The game knows when to hold back and let things build up. A lot of emotional games like this, they play their cards too early. Mamiya builds and builds and builds, and just as you think it's maybe not building to anything, then it strikes, and it does it in such a masterful manner. Just modify the popular walk a mile in someone's shoes with feel a month in someone's head, and you'll get how effective this writing is at making you feel. Hell, part of the trouble about talking about a game like this is not spoiling even some of the themes of each sub-story while still analyzing how effective each one could be. That's a spoiler in of itself, especially with these sub-stories of these characters. Once again, that's thanks to how well each story builds up its themes and subplots related to each character, or how effective it all comes together in the second part of the game in bringing them together in this huge overarching plot. But it's also how sometimes the game hints at certain themes and directions while not being explicit, letting your imagination run wild until the very moments where a reveal is made. With Mamiya, oh boy, those shocking moments, and there are a few that took me out of my seat, made me sit there and just stop and think about what the game had presented me. Yeah, it had done something ridiculous, but it all made sense. And when it all makes sense, then you're just trying to dissect little by little what exactly you saw. But one of the best things about this game is its characters. So let's focus on the 4 main characters in Fall Down first. I'll start with Morichika Haruki, the oldest of the 4, who isn't in school and can easily be described as a womanizer, a grifter, and generally rough around the edges. You'd think with a character like that, it would be easy to hate him. But his glimpses of humanity, even in his selfish moments, on top of the struggles he deals with regarding his relationships, ends up endearing him over the course of the game, especially with his interactions with the maid Mika. Now, for all the characters that I will go over, I will list a set of themes that character may deal with or similarly deal with to try to get an understanding of where their plot goes for you all. But know that only 1 or 2 themes are actually present here. I want to be able to talk about them and give you an idea of exactly what to expect without actually spoiling the theme, because that's part of the fun, trying to figure it out. Morichika's interesting polar elements of his character, where he really wants stability and longevity rather than highs of pleasure and quick returns that he is constantly having, really highlights a character that hides what could be truly causing his behavior in the long run, but makes it make all the sense in the world when it's revealed. Like most of these characters, there's a dark secret under the surface here, and once again, Mamiya makes the story and its payoff so satisfying without feeling like it's doing it just for show. Meanwhile, my favorite character, Kikuchi Raou, is a tough loner who acts as a parent to his only sister, who's pretty much the light of his world. And that's very common in Japan. Parents are off working, the older brother or the older sister is the parent sort of by, well, default. And his story, my god, it almost made me start bawling out loud in the middle of O'Hare Airport while I was on vacation visiting family. Family. In fact, family is at the core of Kokichi's story, examining the bonds that are created when we are born, and really starts to drive into the nature versus nurture elements of our upbringing. Now, the game is constantly playing with an overall theme of what it takes to break someone, and while watching Kokichi's story, it is almost torturous to watch the literal fall down of the character and how it happens. You wish for it not to happen, and you're just sort of aghast when it does. Kokichi's story is probably the most relatable out of the four, and yet also creates this weird dynamic of hope and despair within the story that still fascinates me how the author pulled it off. I've never had a section make me feel so defeated, yet so oddly hopeful out of it. Even when you really sit there and analyze it and go, wait, how did I pull hope out of certain elements of that subplot? That doesn't make any sense, and yet it was still there. But it's the buildup of his character after the events and how he can actually save himself that's the true star here, especially in the second act of the game. One of the things that the game makes clear with all these characters is that we all have moments where we need someone. Sometimes it's even a person who's created by our own subconscious. But it's how we use that connection to better or worsen ourselves that really creates who we are. Even with the fantasy elements here that are present, the reliance on those true relationships and how it can heal even the deepest of wounds if done right, makes the game, despite its supernatural elements at times, feel so very real. And Kokichi is the prime example of that. Now, compared to the other characters, Suo Keto's story is probably the weakest of the four in my opinion, but that's not really saying much considering the high bar set here. His story is also probably the hardest to understand compared to the others in the group about the struggles he's going through right away, focusing on a sense of a wonder versus responsibility in a sense. He's way too kind for his own good and wants to see everything the world has to offer. But at every moment, you're wondering, what exactly is bubbling under the surface? You know something is off, and you just don't know what. His story is the prime example of the game playing the long haul for the story. And to be frank, me saying that his story was the weakest of the four has to do with that mystery element more than anything else. His story is as necessary to this entire plot as everyone else's, but I'm also still trying to understand his story even as I write this review now. Look, I'm a reviewer. I did my best to understand the plot, I reread things, but it's not like I have cliff notes to read about when I don't understand something. I think I do in this case, but I will be interested to see other people's interpretation of his story, and the other stories in fact, because frankly, I think the interpretation and the possible sub-themes could be a story in of itself. I'm fascinated how the reaction to this game will go. In fact, I really hope it, blows up because, well, the game sort of deserves it. Finally, of the big four, you've got Tojo Monato, a popular, handsome young lad who has a story that shows that this story isn't willing to play it safe in the current political and social climate. His issues tackle social acceptance and identity, and many other games that hit this topic wishes it had the skill to navigate the complicated nature of the issue at the core of his story while not shying away from the harsh realities that are behind it. And for those who are concerned that it's pandering or trying to talk about current issues to be cool or hip, no. This is hitting at the core of the issue, and I really appreciate how it is willing to look at the bad parts of it, look at the issues that a person goes through, and not necessarily popularize them or make them glamorous. It gets to the core, and because it does that without any fear, it uses the emotion and teaches people, even those who may not necessarily accept those themes, something new and makes them understand something. I wish more games were like Mamiya. Those games would do so much better that focus on social issues that this one game did with the subplot of this character. Tojo's cheery nature and popularity, coupled with his anxieties, is something everyone can relate to, even if it's not something we experience. And the writer does such a great job of breaking down the harshness of society and how a person can fear it. Now, those who have already played the game are probably sitting here at the 15-minute mark of this review and are yelling and screaming about how I haven't even discussed some of the other characters, and in particular, the two other major characters in the game, Natsume and our titular character, Mamiya, and how their story and their structure plays out. Hell, Mamiya is such a fascinating character in all aspects that I would love nothing more to talk about him in the spoilers section of my Discord in the description below. No, I'm not doing this just to, pimp out the Discord. The thing is, even talking the basics, the true basics of this character and how they play into the story is filled with such spoilers of the structure of the story that I cannot bring myself to spoil a game that I think is worth everyone's time. Hell, I even think that some of the spoilers that I've seen, yes, they're very minor, from the Fruit Bat Factory Twitter, actually hurts the game in the long run in some aspects. But I myself cannot bring myself to spoil a game that I think is worth everyone's time, even in the smallest, slightest way. It would be me like spoiling deaths in Danganronpa, or even the core of a game like Valhalla. As a fan of this game, I just can't do that. But I'm willing to talk to you in the Discord where I can discuss it away so that others aren't spoiled by it. I could sit here and go on about other elements of the game. How the presentation uses dark and light colors masterfully to create a familiar yet unique style that has a dark, brooding nature to it that explodes into certain elements of color, like the emotion that drips in all of its words. I could sit here and tell you that I have very minor aspects of this story that I could truly nitpick, or even talk about how some really odd music choices come out of nowhere with some of the reveals of the game that sort of take me for a loop. I could talk about how the options menu is alright, and that I really wish the game did have resolution options, but in the end, I do appreciate the speed options for the text. But if there's anything that I have learned from all the times that I have done reviews in the past, my 40-minute reviews, my hour-long reviews, is that getting to the core of why you should play the game is important. And in this case, Mamiya's story is so strong and should be seen by everyone that I don't want to take away from that. All the other elements, they're solid, they're reasonable, they have their hiccups, but in the end, you're here for the story, and I don't want to take away from that. It's that good. In the end, Mamiya is a game that will leave an impression on you even after the first set of credits roll, and will continue to do so as you dive into the complicated relationships, themes, and plot twists that the game explores throughout its runtime. Modern day dramas wish it had the emotional depth of Mamiya, and not relying on cheap gotchas or silly melodrama, but characters with real tragedy that react to that tragedy with a realism that makes me want to hug the writer, as it's almost like they went through it themselves. It may be early for me to say this, but Mamiya has launched itself among games like Wondersong, Valhalla, and Enigma, in games that I can't recommend enough. And I'm going to be absolutely heartbroken if this ends up on my 2021 overlooked game list because it deserves so much more than that. It's a gem, coming in at a 94 out of 100, making it a must-buy even if you're hurting for cash. But that does not take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective element of games and makes score adjustments to match a game with you. If you strongly fall into one of the following categories, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you. As you can see, unless if you're someone who hates story games in general, there's no way you should be skipping Mamiya, unless you're extremely sensitive to tough issues. And again, if you hate story games, I'm impressed you made it this far into the review. Thank you for that. Hell, Mamiya gives a dilemma in the fact that I gotta be very careful about the next game I cover on this channel. If it's another indie game that's based on story, I don't want Mamiya to sort of outshine it because it's one of those types of stories. I've learned my lesson from the past. So the next video or two may not necessarily be a full review, but maybe a game design video or something along that line. But the next review will be Resident Evil 8. Yep, I know, I'm the guy who always wants to, promote the indie games and wants to give you guys games that you haven't heard of. Resident Evil 8 doesn't follow that. But considering Mamiya and how strong it was, and the fact is, I sort of like the Resident Evil series, yeah, I'm gonna cover it, and I'm gonna stream it over on Twitch. I will be taking a little mini vacation while the game comes out, so it will be the next week when I actually start streaming it, but hey, I'm going to cover it. The thing that I want from you, more than a subscribe or, liking the video, although those help, is to give me feedback on what you would want more from these reviews. Again, I've been focusing on 18 to 22 minute reviews, even if I've done 40 to 50 minute reviews in the past, but I want to hear what you want to hear more about. What works for you? What doesn't work for you? So I can become a better reviewer. Anyway, this is Dragnix signing out. And as always, keep those people close to you, help you out, and keep on gaming. And now I'm going to probably go play a little bit more of Mamiya. Yeah, I know I beat the game. It's that good, damn it.